sorrow. What depth. This is real. This is real, what we're doing, where we are. This is real. He's not an armchair philosopher, psychologist, no offense to anyone in the room. He's been there. He's sat with people in their dying. He's done the work. He's been in the soil. His hands are filled with dirt from the soil. That's the man you're going to meet tonight. He's an author. He wrote a book, Die Wise. Another book, Money and the Soul's Desires. He co-founded, his lovely wife Natalie, the School for Orphan Wisdom in Canada. He's been in charge of some of the largest palliative care operations in Canada, including the only of its kind for child grief and palliative care. He's a farmer. He's a farmer. He's a human. It's with great honor that I somehow am in this position to midwife Stephen Jenkinson to the stage. Thank you for being here.
I sure sound like a fun-loving guy after that introduction. Obviously, we're here for a night of comedy and giggles. How's it sound, okay, if I'm close? Is that better? Yeah, it didn't sound that strong. Well, short notice, not easy to pull something together. Movie about death, obvious, Saturday night fun. Or a slow night in Ubud. I don't know what the answer is. There you are, and here I am. So I thought I would give you a little feel for what you're about to see, because I don't know, for me it's not that common to go see a movie about a guy, and there's the guy at the same time, so there's got to be some upside to it. So let me see if I can find one, and craft a kind of insider's take on this thing. This movie, a very unlikely thing, it was produced by the National Film Board of Canada, which is a national living treasure in our country, because it's arm's length from the government, and it can do exactly what it wants to. And it's in the documentary film business. And that's a very powerful element for mayhem and fecal agitation. So you probably don't think of Canada as fecal agitation country, but you know, just think of me and think of Leonard Cohen, and you get it. We got it, Joni Mitchell on the side, and so forth. So just, is this okay? We haven't done anything to deserve any, it's not the police or anything, is it? I don't know. Are we being busted? We haven't done anything yet. Not that obviously political, which of course is completely not true. In the West, which is a part of the world I do know something about, there's nothing more politically charged than dying, frankly. Although I'm not sure that I've met anybody who believes that or proceeds accordingly. But I can tell you from being in the sort of front ranks, and I know you look at me now and you think, come on, you weren't the head of the biggest thing and blah, blah, blah in Canada, all that stuff. Come look at you. Obviously not corporate material and the rest. Please don't take my picture, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't like being taken, as I'm sure you don't either. There's a movie, it's lots of video, and this is just me. So I'm here, you don't have to take a picture. Yeah. What was I saying? Yes, obviously not corporate material, and I'm a very good example of what you can get away with. It's particularly if you're the beneficiary of benign neglect administratively. Nobody knows what you're doing, away you go. Now the thing is, you have to be self-appointed in virtually everything you do, which I became. Because I thought I was there to help people die. That's what I thought the business was. That's what I thought palliative care was supposed to be. And I was apparently the only one who thought so. including all the people who are dying and their families and all the rest, nobody seemed to believe that there was such a thing as dying is a good idea when it's time. That was a conversation killer of the highest order, people might imagine. A real non-starter. So then I realized nobody wants help dying. Not in my corner of the world, they sure didn't. What they wanted help with was not dying. And if you just let that in for a second, you may not find yourself from time to time in your life too far away from that sentiment yourself. As I have been close to that many times. You want a lot of help not dying, not only medical help, but whatever's available. And of course, the kind of grotesquerie that has accompanied the West's great kind of technological innovation and triumph is that we have so much technology available to us now, depending on where you live, that really even the idea that it's your time to die has become a lifestyle option. And you have no obligation to be in your time when you are. And if you let that in, it begins to sound like a nightmare, not like a choice. That you don't actually have to die when you are, apparently. So that's why nobody wanted help dying. So I realized my job was to get people to die, not help. And that sounds like a different tone entirely, doesn't it? Get sounds a little forceful, a little coercive. Well, not a little, considerably coercive. And all the giggles are out of the room now, I notice, on this matter. So that's what I had to find a way to do. I had to find a way to be useful to people who are dying, who didn't have dying in their idea of their life, really ever, but certainly not at the end. And but for all of that, this movie is at some level a kind of expose of sorts, I guess, a rendering of the kind of work that I was doing at the time. This is already 8 years old. So I've gotten obviously better since then, and much more suave looking. As you'll see, I was rather rough and untempered in those days, and I've eased into my dotage. I'm kidding you, man. You're supposed to cool up when you get older. It's not working at all. I either didn't get the shots or whatever you need to cool out when you get older. So I'm getting rather agitated about the whole enterprise because people aren't getting with the program, Anyhow, at some level, yes, it is a movie about what I tried to do with dying people. You'll certainly see what I was up against and what they were up against. And if only we could have met on the same side of the enterprise. But it didn't happen very often, to be frank with you. I'll tell you a lot more about that after the film. But what I really wanted to give you a feel for is that this is not a movie about dying. So if that's what you thought, I believe it is too late to get your money back. So, sorry. It's still not too late to get drinks and chips, and, as an alternative. But consider this. It's a movie about something that's so fundamental to being a human being, which dying participates in, but does not rule. Not yet. I got this. I'm in charge nominally. Is this not even working? Oh, here we go. So it's interesting, and the technology is going kaflooey, isn't it? And because we're approaching what we're approaching. Now, this might be the first time for you, but it's the 300th time for me, and without fail, stuff goes haywire. Because there's something about this subject that's just kind of radioactive in a lot of places. At least places where people look like I do up here. I'm not, globally I don't know if that's true. But certainly, everywhere I've been, and Natalie could testify, it's certainly true. So, it's not a movie about dying, but there's lots of dying in it. It's kind of like life is not really about dying, but there's lots of dying in it. So what could be about that sort of carries the same gravity that dying does? What might be slightly more user-friendly? And this is what it is. This movie, I happen to know because I was in it. Although I was introduced many times as a character in the film Griefwalker, which is this strange rendering given that I'm the subject of it. I didn't know who I was playing. But the movie asks a question right close to the beginning, not quite in the way I'm going to say it to you now. But I tell you this because you might miss it. You know, first time watching something, you don't see most of it. I've seen it a few times, as you might imagine, and endured it a whole lot more times. Because many times I watch it, I don't get better looking, and I don't sound any more erudite than I did at the time, which can really bring you down a notch. I mean, if I could advise you, if anybody approaches you with the prospect of you being the subject of a feature-length documentary film, my best advice is hesitate. At least hesitate. And then seek legal counsel. And if you happen to be living with somebody, seek their advice. And then go as quickly the other way as you can, because it's hard on you being filmed, but it's a lot harder on you. The film is a lot harder on you than being filmed is, because, to be frank, and this word will divide the audience up according to age, but the experience is proctological in the extreme. Proctological. Anybody lost on proctological? If you don't know what it is, wait. You will find out what proctological is. Always the chortling comes from people who found out what proctology is. The practice of proctology, of course, is introducing you to your nether parts. That helps. It's a gentle way of saying it. And you find out by being the subject of a film like this that you have places that you didn't suspect. But it's very good if somebody else tells the story of you, because if you told it, you'd leave really important things out. Right? And then you'd feel that you were the expert of your own story, which is ludicrous because you weren't even there for most of it. The story which is you, and you have to catch up to it. So it's proper, though it's really hard on the ego and the rest to see somebody tell you that way. It's like being introduced for 2 hours. And you just sit there and listen to it. You don't even recognize yourself in the introduction after a while. So this movie asks a question. It kind of puts something out there, and it hovers through the rest of the film. And it appears in these kind of elliptical, frankly poetic iterations, which I'm very proud of the guy who made the film that pulled off that at that level. The question is something like, so, what does it take, after all, to fall in love with being alive? That's it. That's it. I see you're not overly overwhelmed by that question, but it's a good thing to wonder about every once in a while, particularly if I don't know if you got the notice in the mail, but if you're in the second half of your life. Some of you got the look, just to tell you. Yes, you and me, nobody else is admitting to it. No, I'm still working on my first half. Are you now? Well, it's not really negotiable if you're in the second half of your life, but if you are, your project changes. Really? It should. The project somehow has to go from why was I born, which is a legitimate thing to wonder about in the first half of your life, to, well, if I find out why was I born, who am I supposed to live the answer with? And that's not really a romantic consideration. That's a kind of village-based consideration. Who am I supposed to live out why was I born with? Second half of your life. That question, what does it take to fall in love with being alive, will kind of get you there. If you try to answer it, that is. This film, I think, tries to answer it. I'm not going to leave you hanging. I'll tell you flat out what the movie said. I'm not going to wreck it for you. This is a movie about dying at some level. You know how it ends, don't you? So I'm not going to blow anything for you by telling you what the movie tells you. So, sorry, I'm functioning like these are the only people in the house. Holy. Okay, this is for you, the rest of the intro, okay? I'm sorry, I had no idea. It's like playing Vegas. Whoa, it's another tier of stuff. Okay, where was I? I'm blinded by the light here. The answer is this, it seems to me. Thank you. If that was intentional, thank you. And it goes something like this. I'm starting to feel like Lenny Bruce up here, actually. All I gotta do is start dropping the F-bomb, which I won't do. Of course not. Mixed company and all that. Old and young, I mean. The answer that the film wafts out like this, more than once, is when, for reasons that you would not choose on your own, you are brought to the threshold whereby you glimpse more than once the end of everything and everyone that you hold dear, then, and probably only then, do you begin to craft the real possibility of falling in love with being alive. Not getting by, not getting through, not even getting your wishes met, but falling in love with it. Imagine that it seems to be in the wiring of being a human, that it takes the ending of things to bring the love of those self-same things to you. Well, I think it does. That's what I saw. And that's what the film and my little talk here offers you as a kind of little stone in your pocket. As you're watching this movie, you can just do that every once in a while. Could that be so? It seems so defeated, this idea that you can't really love something until you glimpse the ending of it. It seems so somehow beyond hope. It is beyond hope. Hope is absolutely not necessary in order to fall in love with being alive. Absolutely overrated as a precondition to fall in love with anybody or anything, hoping that it's going to last. It's not going to last. Your entire life project unfolds in the "it ain't going to last" file, right? And so you're trying to find a way to love as if it's not going to last. Not as if you love hard enough, somehow it will. Magically, I've had many happily married people report to me faithfully that upon death, they figured out the architecture of the afterlife, and they're likely to be with their spouse for the duration. I've never heard the same report from the divorced, though, which would be an odd arrangement, wouldn't it? I mean, if you're married, and even if you're divorced, if you end up together in the afterlife, like 3 or 4 of you, and your ex is married too, it'd be a strange compound, you'd admit. Or maybe not. Maybe not a bad alternative to what we come up with, left to our own devices. Well, anyway, let's say this for the moment. This is a movie that's 70 minutes long. It's about love. That employs dying as one of the great midwives of loving being alive. I think that's what it is. And that's basically what I try to implore dying people to consider. And I didn't have many takers, and I still don't. But it doesn't stop me from coming halfway around the world on a Saturday night and wondering if it's not still so. Or should it be? Something like that. So, I'll leave you with this thought. My wife Natalie was at one of the screenings one time with me, and on the way in she said, "You know, I've noticed something about these screenings. I don't know if you have. It goes like this. You can tell by how the people speak in the so-called question and answer afterwards where you are." I'd never thought. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you know, when you're in a big city, you can tell." "How can you tell?" I said, "You can tell by the way people are speaking that they're pretty sure that no matter what they say, it doesn't have any real or enduring consequence to anybody sitting around them. So either they'll underspeak and kind of disappear into their chest cavity because they're nobody, or they'll overcompensate and be bombastic and demonstrative to compensate for that." And I thought about it and I said, "You know, you're absolutely right, that's been true. What about the other?" "Well," she said, "when you're in a small town, you can tell immediately by how people speak, because when they say something, they speak as if the people around them deserve to hear what they have to say." Isn't that a gorgeous rendering? It doesn't say anything about whether this thing is inherently genius, what they're saying. It says that the people on either side of them deserve their presence and what they have to say. So could we, for one night at least, proceed together after this film as if we're in a small town, and the people on either side of us deserve to hear what we have to say? And I promise you, I don't think there's any arrogance in that. I think that's the antidote to arrogance. To be able to proceed as if you have some merit will take care of your arrogance pretty well. So nobody else has to do that for you. So the film's 70 minutes long, that's all. Not going to really rearrange your architecture too much. And then at the end of 70 minutes, I'll come right back up here as you heard, and we can come right to it. I won't have much more to say, which is a lie, but I won't say it. And I'll just turn it over directly to to all of you, and we can go back and forth to your heart's content. And is that all right?
Yeah.
So thanks very much for coming, and I'm glad I come all this way to watch this movie one more time. See you in 70 minutes, and thanks so much.
It was all supposed to be routine, but my operation has taken a sudden turn. Massive infection, then collapse. I'm delirious and on life support. One of the nurses tells my wife, we're doing the best we can. Word goes out to my old friend Steve, who comes to my bedside straight from the bush. He's in braids and buckskins. He smells of moose. He leans over, puts a few strands of buffalo hair in a little leather medicine pouch, whispers something I don't quite hear. A month later, to great surprise, I'm well enough to be taken home. I move my family to Nova Scotia, make new plans, get on with life. But not before a remark from Steve stopped me in my tracks.
You and I were having lunch, you looked at me, you stopped. Big, uncomfortable pause. And you said to me, you don't sound to me like a man who's been given his life back. And you know, but I was shocked and pissed off by that for a long time. But okay, how would it have gone differently if I had known how close I was to dying then?
Well, the crucible of
Whether they're even in it, frankly, or not, or if the film ever happened. So they certainly weren't in it for the glory or anything. I suspect that they agreed to have themselves filmed in a really, frankly, grim and unflattering time of their lives. On the off chance that you might watch it someday. I don't think that's overstating things at all. And imagine then that somebody who never met you, don't even know that you're in the world, but agree to submit themselves to that anyhow, on the off chance there could be something in their appearance that might be useful to you someday, that kind of underscores or underwrites or does something to our understanding of what a human might be. So I thought you might want to know that. So, all right, over to you, as promised. You might have to shout because I might not see you. Yes. And you really might have to shout so people can hear you. Although I think there's a microphone.
We do mics.
Well,
Yeah.
this lady right here in
It's
the
on now.
corner, unless you, did you mean it? You didn't mean it. Okay.
It's on that. It's on. We have 2 mics in the corners upstairs. If anybody has a question, and then I'm holding one here.
You don't have to sound like you know what you're talking about to ask a question. Here we go. We'll start here. I know there's a couple more I want to go, so very good.
Hello. I thought I'd just ask you, what do you think or how do you feel about people choosing their time to die and, say, committing suicide? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, all kinds of them, sure. Did you hear the question? The question is, in a nutshell, is a question about suicide and euthanasia. And basically is, do I have any thoughts about it? Yeah, I mean, there are opinions galore on this thing, aren't there? And who needs any more? And I don't have any opinions about it. But I'll offer you kind of an observation from the front lines that may or may not be compelling to you. I was asked once every 2 weeks for years to help people kill themselves who were dying anyhow. So I'm no stranger to the dilemma or the request or the demand or all the legal and moral and all the other stuff that boils around this subject all over the dominant culture of the Western world. So you could consider this possibility, regardless of whether we are pro or con, which frankly, I don't think it matters that much. Whether you would vote yes or no, I think is a secondary thing. I think a much deeper thing that would ask more of us than just agreeing or approving or not would be something like this. I can tell you that the real question is, when in the arc of a person's days does the demand or the expectation or the right, as it was often called, to euthanasia announce itself? If you haven't been there, you would probably imagine, rightfully so, that people start asking for euthanasia when, quote, they can't bear it any longer and it's time to get out and the pain is this and the drugs are that, and the bathroom scene is horrendous, etc. You might imagine that's, and I probably went in expecting that very thing. And I can faithfully report to you that that is not when the request came. The vast majority of requests for euthanasia on my watch came from people who were in the, if we call it the intermediate time, when there wasn't frankly a lot of dying going on. Where they had, by virtue of having some treatment, some palliation and so on, they had probably and understandably lost track of where in their life and in their dying time they actually were. And what I'd ask you to consider is, in every place that I've worked, every place that I've presented and taught over the years, now it's 10 countries, it's not a lot of countries, but for what it's worth to you, I'd ask you to consider this troubling proposition, that the demand for euthanasia is particular, it would appear, not unique, but particular to cultures that have a rampant death phobia. And we could go further and imagine the real possibility that the demand for euthanasia and the increasing inclination in certain governments to legalize euthanasia is an expression of the death phobia and not a solution to it. That it's a demand that arises from the very heart of the fear of and the refusal to die and the refusal to learn about dying. So that's my way of saying to you that I would suggest that euthanasia and suicide are not dying. We should, I think, properly reserve the verb to die to describe something that's partly learning, partly a vanquishing of your old understandings that were not gained when you knew anything about dying. When most of your understandings of life are cashiered by dying, and you get an opportunity, often for the first time, to learn things that don't seem to have a payday to them in the early going, that actually deepen your days and that characterize you as a human being dying instead of your humanity dying. So it may well be that we have come, where I live at least, we've come to a point where euthanasia is a death-phobic culture's answer to itself. And like all circumstances like that, it's a way of making sure that the death phobia is there before the euthanasia, during the euthanasia, and afterwards. And that's frankly what I saw. So that's why I say I don't think it matters if we're pro or con. I mean, you know, you develop all kinds of feelings about it as you go along. And if you're in the trenches with somebody close to you, of course it starts to look like a good idea. Of course it does, very compelling stuff. The only thing I'd offer to you as somebody who was there a lot, for what that's worth, would be that when you start talking about you get to choose when you die as a personal right of yours, in the same category as your right to legalize marijuana. Let's take a good example, because just as a coincidence, these two things are being legalized at the same time in a lot of places. Just as a coincidence, or maybe not. But when it starts to become a right that you can die when you want to, it means that the idea that there's such a thing as legitimately your time to die is suspended and will never be visited again as something that's a legitimate understanding of this life that has been granted to you. Yes, sir. We're going to need a microphone. Unless you can really holler.
I love your work, but
The feedback is still
you didn't speak anything about what happens after you die. Because my understanding is when you die is a rebirth of the soul. And if you understand that, the fear of you dying is alleviated.
Mm-hmm. You'd like me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, first of all, the movie's only 70 minutes long. I couldn't get everything in. You know, the afterlife just didn't fit in, apparently, to the editing process. Although I didn't edit the film, so I didn't have a voice of what's in and what's out. But I can speak to it now. Now, first of all, you know, like you, I have no obligation to have all the answers to everything. And I have no obligation to know the architecture of the afterlife at all. Although I must tell you that the phrase afterlife strikes me as rather odd. Here's why. Let's start with the word life. Now, in its fulsomeness, you'd probably grant that life includes everything. Is that fair? Life is the whole thing. So life would, in a reasonable understanding of what life would include death, wouldn't it? Not be annihilated by death, would actually include it. And so it's really, is there such a phrase as after everything? What would after everything possibly be? So I think the life includes the whole deal. So that's one thing. But the other thing that strikes me is I can faithfully testify to you, with no exaggeration and no opinion on my part, that I was probably in with around 1,000 people who died. Now, I grant you that's not millions. I couldn't survive millions. I'm not sure I survived 1,000, to be frank. But for what it's worth, I could generalize from those 1,000. You know, in one particular country, in one jurisdiction, in a particular country, over a few year period in the world. So I certainly don't elaborate across all of humankind from this. I said it many times there, I'll say it again now. But the people who died on my watch, they had convictions going into their dying time about, quote, what happens after you die. And almost none of those convictions survived the realities of dying. And the reason I want you to hear that is because I'd like you to really consider that many of the beliefs that we seem to have, that I've heard about many times, that I'm not a stranger to any more than you are, about what happens to us after we die, none of those beliefs or convictions are actually crafted in the presence of dying. Most of them are crafted when dying is considered, weighed out, and otherwise debated about. And of course, there's a lot of inherited things in spiritual traditions and religions and the rest. But there rarely, if ever, did I find that dying people's understanding of dying came from their dying. It usually came from a time when they weren't. Something similar to all our ideas that we bring to parenting. Most of them come from never having been one. And then one of the realities that befalls your great plans for crafting a superb human being called your child is that every idea you had of how to do it will not survive the actual sort of blunt force trauma of your kid appearing in your life. So dying is similar, of similar scale and epic proportion, that it actually doesn't really obey the belief that you craft in its absence, that you try to bring to bear when it's present. It's a very powerful thing, dying, to be frank, and it doesn't really settle down. You can't really domesticate it with a belief system. That's what I found. I'm not saying that people died, mad with horror, but I'm not saying they didn't. I will offer you the real possibility that most people took out an insurance plan in their healthier days, which is the only time they'll give you an insurance plan, when you're healthy, about what dying is, what it means, and all the rest. And it frankly didn't resemble much what the realities actually were. Last thing I'd suggest to you about it would be this. As you wouldn't be surprised to hear that many of the people that I worked with who were dying were avowed atheists, or what's the other version? Agnostics, there you go. And here was their particular torment. They came to dying as if, quote, when you die, that's it. There's nothing, get over it, and all that. Now they're dying. And they're not playing ping pong with opinions anymore. The time for that is suddenly in full eclipse, and it's never coming back. And atheist people who believe that when you die, that's it. As they came to their dying time, were no longer sure of whether they should have been right about this their whole life. It is a strange and almost counterintuitive proposition to come to the end of your days, the ending of your days, and really weigh out whether you want to have been right in your kind of running commentary that you maintain about what does it mean to die, what does it ask of you to die, and all of the rest, since most of the ideas, frankly, are crafted in the absence of dying altogether. So one of the things I was really pleading for all along is that the best death is frankly the most public death. And I don't mean by that, exploding symptomatology in front of people. I mean that your death is actually the occasion for everybody who's not dying to outgrow their opinions and their attitudes about it just long enough to see it and to learn something about it and to be tutored by it. And even in some strange way, to be assured about certain of its sort of salient features and cardinal points on the particular compass of the ending of your days. In a sane culture, everybody's death before your own is your chance to get it right, to get it straight, to not be in the land of your belief, quote unquote, but to be informed by what's actually right in front of you. The more private deaths become, the more bereft and impoverished the culture generally becomes on this matter, to the point where that impoverishment was my job security in the death trade for 15 years. And it's never a security I would ever have sought or colluded with. But that's what happened.
Where did your fascination with death come from?
The question was, where did my fascination with death come from? As if I had such a thing. And he might have asked me first, you are fascinated with death, right? And the answer is not at all. I'm not fascinated by it. I've been, instructed by it beyond reason, frankly, because it certainly messed with my day. And, with any old-fashioned aloofness I might have been able to achieve in my middle years, that's all a casualty. That's long, long gone, to the point where one of the occupational hazards of working in the death trade, frankly, is that you see your own death in such exquisite detail that you don't even get to be an amateur in your own dying. You don't even get to stumble, really, but because you're too informed. You've got too much information. So that's my plight, such as it is. So I'm not fascinated by it. In fact, I can tell you this. Oftentimes I'm interviewed and people will assume without saying it that I'm somehow, because of everything I've seen, because of what I say and the rest, that to use the good old North American phrase, I'm good with it. And so when this comes up, when I hear this and I say, well, just ask me. And they'll say, well, you're good with your own death? Hell no. Hell no. I'll say it a third time, no. Not in the least am I good with it. If good means I've surrendered, if good means I've accepted, if good means it doesn't bother me or trouble me or sadden me or drive me to despond every now and then, if that's what that means, hell no. No. I'm not looking forward to it for 1 second. I'm not inured to it because of what I've seen. I didn't take my shots, my death shots, so that I'm somehow build up the right antibodies and I'll just... And I must tell you, if you've ever thought of having a website, let me be the first to recommend that you don't do it. Because if I can use a vernacular, there's some kids here, but it's not a word they haven't heard before. If you have a website, the website is a shit magnet. It draws from at least the human aspect of the universe. All of the conceivable weirdness will sooner or later appear on your doorstep. And here's an example. I've received several unsolicited, what should I call them? Invitations from the beyond. And they go like this. Now, I've had a dream about you. And God told me that what you have to do when it's your turn to die, you got to get the cameras working trained on you, hopefully from different angles, like this, and you got to record the whole thing, and then you got to put it on the website. And God just wanted me to let you know that that's what you're supposed to do. So, of course, you leave open the remote possibility that some lunatic in Topeka, Kansas, God has actually told them something for you. That's a remote possibility, but I'm guessing that God doesn't work that way. It could be, but I'm not going with it anyway. So I'm not going to do that. In case you weren't curious how it's going to go, I'm not doing it. If I see any cameras in the room, if I can get up, I'll smash it. Because, I'm talking about it now. I don't plan to do it. That's not what I mean by a death being available to everybody else. Because when you start beaming it in like that, it's not dying anymore. It's a spectacle. That's not dying. It's not a human-scaled event. Dying first and foremost is a human-scaled proposition. So I'm not okay with it. It saddens me a lot. The prospect that all the questionable souvenirs that I have at home will last longer than I will. I don't like it. I don't like it. No. And I find life to be habit-forming in the extreme. And older I get, more habituated I am to. We got up this morning, sat at the table, I looked around at everybody, and I said, look at us. Which is not the purview of people with gray. I mean, anybody can say that. And it's a good practice. And one of the things, you're not saying, well, look at us until we can't anymore. You say, look at us because, I don't want this to end. And you're allowed not to want it to end. You don't have to accept the fact that you're dying. Where the hell did that come from? This acceptance that, I know where it came from just as well as you do. But of course I'm railing against it right now. I say you have an obligation to death, like all the gods of the world, which is death is certainly one. But you don't have an obligation to be okay with it. To treat it like it's another day in the, in the office or something. It's a very big deal. And it will mess with your general sense of well-being. You can't get ready for that. You see? But you can practice. You get a feel for it, so you don't come to your death as a rank amateur. That's kind of what I'm pitching.
So
Yes.
when you said you can't practice, you can practice for it, right? You said that you can practice.
Where's our mic person?
It's,
We gotta circulate that thing a little bit,
we had an order.
so we keep the groove going.
You said that you can practice for it.
Go ahead.
And so I just wanted to add to that. Feels to me that practicing for the death, for our death, would be to experience life as totally as possible. To not miss, just to, what I keep hearing is the more totally that we live life, the more we will be prepared for the moment when we have to let go of life. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is that if you say, hell no, I don't want to die,
Mhm.
is it, I'm just wondering what part of you doesn't want to die, or what is that part? Is it control, or?
I told you, man. I'm not hiding anything from you. I like being alive a lot. There's no control involved in that. I like it a lot. I'm not obliged to surrender loving it, I don't think. And it won't be easy. It won't be easy at all. And I'm really not sure that I don't understand the thing about, living life to the fullest. I honestly don't know what it means or what it would look like, but when it comes to time to consider dying over and over again as something that you don't get a vote on, not really, then this is not defeat, but the alternative is not mastery. That's what I'm pleading for, that there's some humility in this regard. That dying is bigger than what we can come up with about it. And mostly, frankly, what I hear, and all over the place, is there's strategizing going on about how to minimize its consequence, or the kind of gravitational pull it exerts upon you, or how bad it makes you look, and the idea you can sort of ready yourself so that none of that makes a claim upon you. I'm not sure what the idea of readiness would really be, except that phrase I tried to craft there, whereby you don't come to your life as an amateur and make rookie mistakes. I mean, some of you have been married more than once, just guessing. Is it true? Not as a show of hands, but just a general rumble. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, it's just me. Okay, so I'll tell me the story right now. So now, you come out of the first marriage, which is in some respects, it's the trainer marriage. It's training wheels for trying to get it right, isn't it? And what kind of mistakes you make in your first marriage? And the answer is spectacular mistakes of an order you never thought yourself capable of, frankly. And you made all these vows, didn't you? Going into the first one about how you heard your parents and their lunatic bullshit, so you're never going to do that. And of course, that's your script. So you come, anyway, you know how it works. And so you make every conceivable error in judgment that you're capable of at the time. And so you come out of that one and you just make a blood oath. Don't you? Then you come up and you go into the second marriage and say, I got it now, I got it. But there's no such thing as a marriage pro, you'd grant, isn't it? So you're not exactly a rookie, but you're not exactly a pro. You could be married 7 times, and that would be a sure sign that you're not a pro, wouldn't it? A guaranteed indicator. So I am kind of joshing with you, but I'm trying to offer things that don't seem quite as, quote, serious as dying. But if you've ever been divorced, it's right up there. It's right up there with dying, for you. Let's be clear. It just is. So you can learn a lot about marriage from divorce. But it doesn't include mastering the thing. And you can learn a lot about dying from the people who died before you. But it doesn't include you being the boss when it's your turn. Ah, yes. By the end of the night, we're going to get this figured out. Don't you worry. No volume at all, but I'll translate what you say.
Well, thank you.
There we go.
Thank you for being here tonight. I feel really grateful to be sitting here this evening. And
Me too.
I was wondering, out of the 1,000 people that you've counseled through the dying process, have you noticed any difference between how men and women deal with the dying process?
You really want to do that to me?
Yeah.
You really want me to talk about that in this crowd?
Yeah.
And you think I'm going to be able to walk out of here on my own 2 feet? So if you didn't hear it, the minefield she's just laid before me and invited me to dance in it is this. Have I noticed any difference between men and women when it comes to the dying thing? My language, not yours. Is that fair? Fair recitation of what you're asking? Okay, so first thing to say is it's not a good idea to generalize across genders any more than cultures. You'd grant, right? Okay. But the 1,000 people did fall into basically 2 categories of gender. So for what that's worth, nobody's come up with a third one that I can read. But anyway, so here's one of the things I saw. I'll just tell you a story. And it's not to be elaborated upon, but it might be recognizable to you. If not now, maybe someday it'll be useful. So in this case, the man was dying, and there was a high degree of agitation in the family, over and above what you might expect. And finally, his wife came to me in somewhat perplexity, but mostly almost rancor, right? And her principal lament was that he wasn't sharing his feelings with her about dying. What are you laughing? I'll tell the story, and then you can laugh at the end, because you know how it ends, I can tell. So this is a challenge, because she's not wrong in some fashion about him, quote, not sharing his feelings with her. The thing that's up for grabs is, what does it mean that he's behaving as he is, and perhaps not as she would have him do if she were in charge of his inner life? And this is what I offered to her. I said, you know, what I'm about to say is going to sound like caveman stuff. And, you know, most things masculine have been so discredited in the last 40 or so years that it's very taxing to even try to revive it and use the language again, but I'm going to anyhow. So I said, you know, most of us are born with a kind of thing that has come to be called the provider gene, almost. Now you could say, yeah, I was married to a guy, he didn't have the gene at all, and maybe so. That could be right, you did get provided for 5 minutes. But by and large, it's a kind of useful and recurring theme that you find in men's orientation of things. What the culture does with it, how it employs it, how it legitimizes or honors that is a whole other question. Whether it employs it at all, whether it discredits it, demeans it as controlling and all the rest. Okay. But it's there. And so I said to her, so here's probably what's going on. Here's a man who, you know, he's an ordinary fellow, right? Nothing, quote, spectacular about him. He's not even spectacularly manly in this regard. He's just trying, I suppose. And on a good day, he might get close. And on the rest of the days, he doesn't. So that provider gene gets really messed with when you're dying as a man, I have to tell you. And here's why, because it's very, very difficult when you're dying to act on it anymore. Now you might say, but he's not supposed to act on it anymore. And you might as well tell him, well, you're not supposed to be a man anymore. Dying is the end of your manhood then. You see? And I've heard that more than once. So, you can imagine the slander that's inside there. So I said, so, you know, the difficulty in acting upon is he can't even protect you from himself because he's dying, you know. he's become a full-time job for you. He would have chosen anything but this, probably. And he's immensely distressed that he can't protect you from his dying. So he gets as close as he can. And I'm not saying he knows he's doing this. I'm just saying it could be in the air. That I think what he's doing is he's keeping away from you the last thing that's left to him to keep to himself, which is, how is it for him to be dying? What he's doing is trying to find a way to love you when all his old understandings of loving you have been a casualty of his diagnosis. So, that's true. He's not withholding, not the way you mean. And I'm not saying he shouldn't learn to speak your language when he's dying. I'm not saying that either. I'm just describing something, not really advocating. And as many stories as there are like that, there's lots of stories about women dying, how it is. You saw 2 of them, yeah, 2 of them there. And you saw it in the case of the mom with the impossibly long eyelashes, at the end there. And her great concern was, how's my family ever going to survive my death? And she didn't think they would. As a blended family, 2 different sets of kids and all of that. And she wasn't wrong that this was absolutely up for grabs, because, as oftentimes happens, she was the kind of glue that kind of enforced this familyness upon people who didn't really choose each other, mainly the children. Because that's true, the kids don't get a choice by and large. And what I tried to plead with her to consider is that her dying is not the end of her mothering. It's not the end of her being a wife. Her dying is, given half a chance, is the fullest incarnation of what she meant by being a mom, and what she meant by being a wife and a woman, and all the other things that we are obliged to live in our lives. That's what dying could properly be, the deepest incarnation of what you meant. See, because we all know that when life's just bumping along, normally unhappily, as Sigmund Freud characterized this, normally unhappy is what you want to be, according to him. When this is going along this way, there's an out clause about, are you going to do everything you're capable of with respect to being a man or a woman, husband or wife, father or mother, etc., and all those other things? Really? And you might get up in the morning and say it, but by 2 in the afternoon, hasn't showed up yet. And it reminds me of a prayer I heard one time that this might be useful to you someday if you're a praying person. It's non-sectarian, so you could probably go along with it. And it goes something like this. Say, God, help me. Now, here's the thing. So far, I haven't maligned anybody. I haven't taken my neighbor's wife, I haven't looked at her like that, and and I've been pretty good so far, and I haven't slandered anybody. I haven't stolen a damn thing. However, I'm about to get out of bed. I'm going to need some help from here on out. So please. So that tends to be, in my experience, how a lot of people, cruise their days. It's just before you get out of bed, your whole day, so to speak. In other words, you're just getting warmed up here. But you're 72. What do you mean you're getting warmed up? Come on. You don't have much time. That's just the truth. So, the preparatory phase is long gone. I'm just trying to get it right. That's because you got people 1/3 your age looking to you for some sign that this is a doable something. And as I've said a million times in a circumstance, please proceed accordingly. And many's the time I've had to say to parents who are dying way too soon in their children's lives, I've had to say the equivalent of, you are crafting the memories that your children are going to have when they're not children anymore. And when they have children of their own, they're going to have the memories that you are engaged in crafting with them these days, these very precious, withering days. Please proceed accordingly. So that's who we are. We're in the memory crafting business. We're just not going to have the memories someday. But a lot of people will. So that and much more is at stake. How you feeling? You got enough in you for a couple more questions? 2, 3, and that's it. Anybody in the gallery?
Yeah.
Because these guys are dominating stuff. Oh, and what about you? Yes. You just lean over and yell. Oh, there's a mic.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for this amazing conversation. It's really, really amazing to be holding this conversation. You touched a bit on ancestors and the cycle. I'm just curious to follow that up. The life and death and the ancestral lineages that we hold as well, and the responsibility there.
Is there a question in there? Or you just
I
go?
wanted you to, because I felt you touched, I just heard it in the film, and it kind of raised a really big question, but I know there's more. I think there's more.
You hope there's more.
I think there's more.
Wouldn't it be great if there was more? Well, there probably is more, but okay, I'm going to have to raise up a little trouble here. Nothing to be done about it. I just have to. Not because I like to, but because there's trouble in what you've asked. Basically, to generalize, but it's a safe generalization, is that most people in this world who resemble me have come to the life that they live in the place they live it as a more or less direct consequence, unintended, but absolutely traceable, to an involuntary, forced, quote-unquote, immigration to another place. The consequence, and I say quote-unquote immigration because that makes it sound like, yeah, let's go to Canada or something. If you've ever been to Canada, just the weather alone would, well, you saw. Anybody remember snow? I should have warned you on the snow thing. It came up right away, probably. It's disturbing. Not the best. So, we got it all the snow at our place. You'll be fine. Well, what I'm saying to you is this. If you are a consequence of a spontaneous and frankly wretched event called mass migration, that never happens, quote, naturally. It's not a naturally occurring thing. These things are forced upon people, okay? Oftentimes in the form of trying to escape something, trying to get out from under something, trying to get out before something happens. The real truth is, everybody who's trying to get out that way, it's already happened, okay? And I'd ask you to consider the real possibility that when you end up in another country, which probably for most of us, it's not another country, it's the one you were born in. But it's ancestrally, it ain't your home. And there's something real about that phrase, about that statement. That, your ancestry is not really negotiable. Most people I've met, when they talk about it at all, imagine it as kind of the Walmart of possibilities. That's what ancestry is. And you can just pick and choose as you go, as it suits you. You get some funky ancestors, some feather-clad ancestors, and so forth. I haven't heard many people really claim they're the bad guys. I'll just put it that way. And well, if there's such a thing as ancestors in the living moment, which mean if, but let's just as a statement say, if there's such a thing, and if how they are is in any way dependent upon how we are with them, then I can tell you that the part of the world that I know pretty well, is in the wretched state of disrepair and dismay that it is, largely because that lived relationship is virtually non-existent. So it has real consequence in the present for the living. And if there's such a thing as your ancestral dead, is it possible then that those same consequences adhere as much and as devastatingly to your ancestors in the present moment as they do to you? And I'm asking you to consider the real possibilities, yes. So it's a very troubling proposition, because the truth of the matter is, by the time you awaken to such a thing as ancestry, if you've probably grown up in a place that didn't really carry that reality ongoingly with you, day in, day out, ceremony, this, and so on. If you didn't, you wake up in your 30s, let's say, or perhaps your 40s to this thing. Is it possible that there's some consequence that accrues to all of the failure to carry this along with you in your days? Not punishment, as I tried to convince Tim Wilson when he was clear that he thought that the whole arrangement came down to your ancestors are pissed with you and they're going to punish you. And that's the whole dynamic. You know, that's basically a parent-child disapproving dynamic, finger wagging, and that's who your ancestors have become. And I tried to say to him, that's not the dynamic. Nowhere in the so-called intact world, it seems to me, do people ever proceed as if their ancestors are there to hold them to account and punish them when they're not good. More, the arrangement between the living and the dead would appear to be something in the order of the word I used in the film was maintenance. That means caring for. That means proceeding as if you are needed for their sake, for their health, if you will. Okay? So, I worked in one of the most, quote, multicultural cities on the planet, Toronto, Ontario. And one of the grim realities of multiculturalism is that it becomes, it kind of submits to the lowest common denominator on these matters. And without a shared understanding between people, it is exceedingly difficult to keep an ancestral tradition alive ongoingly when the culture around you, if you can call it a culture, has no intention of corroborating that in your life. And that is, I'm just describing to you North America. You decide, if you're not a North American person, whether this bears any resemblance to anything you've seen or thought or been concerned about or troubled by, or may I say, haunted by, in where you come from. Because you know it's not unique to North America. But as it happens, A, I can talk about it knowing something about the place. B, North America might be one of the great petri dishes of human history, because the white version of America was created so fast that people could actually see, who had the ability to see it, could see these ruptures happening. Two little things to say about it. One is, there's a French, I think, noble named Alexis de Tocqueville. Some of you may have heard his name. Like many well-off Europeans did at the time, he'd take his retinue over to America, and then he traipsed about the countryside, you know, drinking tea and being noble and making notes in his little tent at the end of the day after visiting with the quaint natives and the rest. And he wrote a book. I think it's called something, Travels America, something close to it. But he's got a line that comes from there that is so worth hearing, apropos of your question. He said, America, he said, may be the only place on earth that's gone from frontierism to barbarism without passing through the intermediate stage of civilization. Because it happened too fast, you see. The other thing I'd ask you to consider is that when people missionize other people, and just so I can be clear, I'm not just talking about, quote, Christian missionaries here, because Christians do not have the market corner of missionizing, historically. When missionizing people do their work, the first place they aim, it's so consistent that it's almost a law. You think they're taught this in missionary school, is they take aim at the lived relationship that proceeds between the living and the dead, which is partly ceremonial and partly daily life. They take dead aim at that, and they shame it, and they devilize it, they satanize it, you know what I'm saying? They characterize it as an attribute of backwardness and unsophistication. You understand what I'm saying? And of all the things they could aim at, the lived relationship with one's ancestors turns out to be the most effective way to impoverish this person as a precondition to missionizing them. Of all the poverties that could ensue, losing your lived relationship with your ancestors for a human being might be at the very agonizing top of the list. And alas, we use it on each other from time to time, that very thing. So yeah, I'm very concerned about all these things, and you know, most of the people that I worked with who were dying, died, if I can use this horrendous expression, ancestor free. You know? And the strange thing, I mean, that's how they lived, you know? And the strange thing was, more dying people than not, at some point in their dying time, actually looked at me and they said, I don't know what to do. And I knew they were talking about this. And so my way of translating, I don't know what to do, would be, most dying people on my watch didn't know which way to face. Because they didn't really have a lived understanding. They could answer the following question. I'm going to say it in a biblical sounding language, but the language is, unto whom am I dying? Unto whom? So, that's a beginning. This is days, I have a school for this. It's called the Orphan Wisdom School. Well, why do I call it Orphan Wisdom? Well, you're starting to get the feel. You know, so it takes many, many days to approach this. And if I'm trying to approach this material with people who have lived, frankly, ancestor-free, can you imagine the difficulties in beginning to approach it just to make the things even tangible without people defending themselves against the implications? The consequences of all that neglect over how many generations? While in the current order, so many people are marauding the countryside, seeking out somebody else's ancestors to attach themselves to. Yes?
So, some years ago in the town that I moved here from, there was a woman who was very beloved by the community, and then she got the diagnosis that she had incurable liver cancer. And she really went through the process of falling very ill and then dying in a very conscious way, and was an amazing learning for the entire community, and it was quite remarkable. At the end of her time, her last words, she just lifted up out of her bed, sat up and went, "Oh, it's so beautiful." And I've heard other such quotes. I don't know if it's true, but Steve Jobs apparently said, "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow," and then died. I don't know if that's true. So my question to you is, having witnessed so many deaths, when the veils seemingly are thinned, has this been your experience to witness?
The old wow part?
Well, similar.
Or the equivalent?
The equivalent, yes.
No.
Okay.
No. Now, the biggest single reason for that, is the Empire calling in? Making sure we're okay? The biggest single reason for that is the lion's share of people. I should tell you, I didn't work in hospital. You might have guessed from there that I did, but actually all the work I did was in people's homes. Because the idea was to try to enable them and their families to keep their person home and have them die there. And I can tell you that 90+% of the people who died in some degree of sedation. And the last answer I gave you is the answer why. The deep answer why there's so much sedation used in the West on people who are dying. I mean, largely is to help the families, to be frank. Because if the person can't writhe and so on, the families are feeling that everything's going okay. So I've often recommended, let's sedate the family and leave the patient alone, see what happens. Nobody ever really took me up on it, but I was serious. But it's a good idea. But so sedation makes it very difficult to say, "Oh wow," or anything else. Now, the thing I'd ask you to consider is this: why so much sedation in a quote natural event? The answer is because when people were dying where I lived and worked, it wasn't quote a natural event. And I'm not talking about treatment or chemotherapy or anything like that. I'm not saying those things are unnatural. What I'm saying is the understanding that dying is a legitimate outcome of every good idea you ever had, of how much broccoli you ate or didn't, how many good thoughts you thought, how much Pilates you could manage. Dying is the proper outcome of all your Pilates. I mean, try to sell a retreat based on that. Just try it. You're going to die anyhow, so might as well come. It's not going to work out, no. So you understand that most of the measures that are undertaken in the West are to see to it that you don't. Now, nobody says it, but I'm suggesting to you that all this sedation is a consequence of so many people coming to their death as amateurs. And that's not an indictment. I'm not criticizing. I'm lamenting. Because it doesn't have to go that way. But man, we have some enormous learning back where I live for things ever to be otherwise. And the idea that you demonize a physician because they're willing to tranquilize you is the worst possible response that you think might fix things. Because I can, I was around. I'm not in the doctor defending business, if anything. But I can tell you this, I never saw a doctor do something to somebody that they were not in cahoots with, or their family was not in cahoots with. Never. There was accomplices galore on the sedation thing. Galore. So there's an enormous sea change that is not going to be affected by this, for example, the euthanasia thing. Won't even touch it. Go ahead and legalize it. You won't even touch this thing. Because this thing does not come from the last 6 hours of life. That's not where all the terror comes from. It comes from this question I was talking about earlier. It comes from being kept away from so much death as you're growing up and the rest. How many times have people asked me when I was working, should I bring my 4-year-old to the funeral or the deathbed or the hospital? And I would always say, why wouldn't you? And they say, well, his grandpa looks pretty rough. And I would, of course, that's true. I would say that's true. He does, but why is that the reason not to bring your son? Well, I don't want him to be traumatized. Oh, of course you do. What would traumatize him? I asked. Well, and then he just gives up on that line of reasoning with me because clearly I don't get it. And then the next thing he'll say was, well, I want him to remember Grandpa the way he was. Bingo. There it is. Nobody's allowed to have a memory of Grandpa with no teeth, drooling, incontinent, and the rest. Apparently it's just not part of the... You don't believe me? Check out a normal memorial service. I guess they are. And service is a strange word for what happens there. And now there's, film loops are a big deal. So you got this person on this recurrent film loop that if you're in the funeral home longer than 20 minutes, you're going, I've seen this program already. Because it's the same pictures going through and through and through. And guess when the pictures begin? Usually when the dead person about this big, guess where they end? Not toothless and drooling. You virtually never see those pictures. So you understand that there's an authorized memory that's being afforded you as a young person. It's just like the way Russians used to teach history. They used to improvise and rewrite their history books every 4 or 5 years to suit the current regime. Well, it's not just the Russians who do that. We're pretty good at it, generally speaking, in the West, and that's one of the ways we achieve it. Ooh, you're looking restless. Like, huh? The seats are uncomfortable. Well, you've been in worse torment than an uncomfortable seat. But you're never going to get this again. No, you know it's true. The likelihood of this being reconvened like this, with Buddy at the front here like this, not that likely. So let's tough it out for, 10 minutes. You got 10 minutes in your butt? 10 minutes. I will keep you a minute longer.
What would a good day look like?
Them that has the microphone wins. Two seats behind you. She's got the mic for the moment. I'll get to that. There you go.
Okay.
My best friend's husband passed away last year, and the last 9 hours of his life he was choking. Choking.
Yeah.
What would be the reason for that?
The reason? Why was he choking for the last 9 hours of his life? Well, I wasn't there. I don't know. It depends a lot on if it's a cancer-related thing. The location would have a lot to do with it. But there are things called autonomic activities. Breathing is one. You don't decide to do it. Swallowing is in the neighborhood. Eye blinking and a few other basic things like this. Choking is all of that gag thing. Any body workers in the house, I'm not telling you that you don't know. The emotional states are highly involved in certain places in the body, highly articulated. So, there's many ways to be terrified. And if if you're at the point where you can't make yourself understood verbally, and many dying people, reach that before they die, I can tell you that there's a lot of ways to more or less involuntarily signal panic and torment and the rest. And it could be, but I don't say that I know. It could be that. It could be not just mechanical, is what I'm saying. Nobody wants to ask about the canoes? What? Who's got the mic? It's barely on. I'll repeat you what you said.
Okay. I get you've done a lot of work and you've been with people. Okay. Is there still space for people to share time with people that they don't know to help them find peace and release trauma before they die about their lives?
Answer the question, is there
so
space?
People are dying, they're getting to a point of fear, they're getting to a point of not being able to connect to ancestors that they don't have, not being able to, maybe they've had improper relations, they haven't made peace with their son, their daughter, whatever, someone doesn't talk to them for 20 years. Is there still space for them for people trying to find peace for them, with them in that before they die?
Gotcha. Well, the answer is hypothetically, yes. But I'd like to tell you a little story from the trenches. And it's not my story, I'm just relating it. There's a lunatic in American television named Larry King. You may have heard of him. He's just strange. But anyway, he had George Harrison's widow on some years back. And they were talking about, George and all of that. And somehow Larry King really wanted to know about how George Harrison died. Like, actually what it was like. Because there's some fascination with these things. And she said, well, we knew for 3 or 4 years, and we tried a lot of things, and we knew it wasn't, quote, working. But beyond that, he was a pretty faithful, meditation practitioner, and all of these things helped. And she stopped, and you realize she was about to say something that she hadn't decided to talk about, and it was out of her mouth before she stopped. This is what she said. She said, but he was about 3 weeks or so out from dying, and he looked at me. And he said something to me that was so unlike him in its severity and almost accusing tone. And he looked at me, not venomously, but dangerously. And this is what he said to me. He said, if you're waiting to get to know God until you're dying, I'm telling you there's such a thing as too late. I think that's true too. There is such a thing as too late. And it's not necessarily, well, you're addled by drugs, so what are you going to do? Not necessarily. My way of saying this to you is something like this. I never found that dying people became spiritual geniuses as a consequence of receiving a terminal diagnosis. I never saw it happen. You think with 1,000 people, somebody must have become like Gandhi or something, just when they found out they had cancer. Some version of something. It never happened. Here's what happened over and over again. The people died more or less clearly in the manner of their living. That their way of dying resembled their way of living so emphatically that there was almost no ripple or break in the continuity of what kind of person they had insisted on being. Now you might think, well, at least they were consistent. It's good, no? You might think that. Unless you allow the real possibility that if that life that I'm talking about was lived in a culture that doesn't warrant or teach or endorse or embrace or is informed by the realities of dying, then you might reasonably expect that a life lived minus dying is not going to be very useful to you when you are dying. And alas, more often than not, that's what I saw. Is that people died in their manner of living and you wished otherwise for them, and it didn't go that way because the habits were so strong And they had turned into they had calcified, their life habits had calcified into a self. And this self was defiantly resisting dying, changing anything. I mean, as God is my witness, this happened. The patient's 28 years old. She has stage 3 breast cancer with metastases to the lungs. So this is she's not going to die in her breasts, she's going to die in her lungs. Not being able to breathe. She's already on nasal prongs. I come in. Her mom's sitting beside her on the couch. And I asked her, what's your understanding of what's happening to you? She says, quote, well, she said, I understand I'm seriously ill, but really, I don't let it be a big part of my life. You should be doing this. If you have eyebrows like this, and a spotlight, it helps. You should be doing some version of what? You really should. But in a culture that doesn't believe in dying, what does that sound like?
Denial.
Doesn't it? She looked to her mother after having said this, and her mother went, no word of a lie, her mother went like this. That's my girl, she said. Which no doubt, that's exactly who that was. Chip off the old block, apparently. And then she looked back at me and she said, and my yoga instructor says, I'm on the right track. Well, who am I? I'm just the death guy. I'm dealing with the holy trinity of she's sure, her mom's corroborated, and of course, Mr. Lululemon has warranted to forget it. Just don't even forget it. It's just details. It's just fluff and gauze. That's what it sounds like, friends. That's it. Can you imagine if you were that way with the advent of your firstborn in your house? You say, I don't really let it be a big part of my life. It's a protein unit on the table. I do what has to be done. But I gave it a name. Who knows what that means? Well, does it sound any different? It's no different. Just the same orientation. One example, it sounds like it's actionable child protection time. We got to rescue a kid from your insanity. But when you're dying and you have the same orientation to your death, what do we say? Patient adjusting well to diagnosis. I mean, get me out of here. How is anything going to change when there's so much collusion at so many levels to turn dying into whatever? Instead of a God. Well, maybe this is a good time to bring this thing to a ragged halt.
One more question?
Surely.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I'd be here all night. This is my life we're talking about. Somebody's managing the turns. Isn't it amazing? It never works. It goes to the next person, still doesn't work. Yeah.
I have an observation to make.
Didn't hear a word.
You will realize right away.
You don't have the mic in front of you, sir.
I'm not a native English speaker, but I guess I can make my point across.
Okay.
5 years ago, I had a bypass operation, a routine operation, and then shortly after that, my heart stopped and I went out. I think it was what one calls generally a near-death experience. So my wife was sitting at my bedside and she said, you know, after some time, I lost all time frame since that time. I don't know. I lost the meaning of time. I lost everything. And I'm severely handicapped.
Mm-hmm.
And but I remember my wife said my name. She said, Amy, please come back, we love you, we need you. My heart had stopped, and I found out it stopped for about 5 to 6 minutes. And that's the limit when you take serious damage, because no oxygen comes to your brain.
Yeah.
And so I don't see anymore on the 80%, I'm vision impaired. And so my observation was where I was when she said, and I heard her words, please come back. And apparently she noted everything which I spoke, and I spoke in different languages. I said, it's so beautiful where I am. I didn't want to come back. And since that time, of course, I have no fear of dying anymore. Because what I noticed, I know there are many, many theories and many people have seen, yes, I saw a man with a white beard and so on. That's all nonsense. But you see a light, definitely, you see a light. And I lost all time frame. I don't know how long I was. I woke up about 4 days after my heart had stopped. I uttered my first words. But I was gone about 5 minutes.
Okay. Do you want me to say anything about any of this stuff, or do you have a question about it? Or?
Yeah, my question is, what is your view about a near-death experience? Can one come back clear, or are you really that much, gone? That I live now without time frame, without anything. I lost everything because where I was, it was so beautiful, and I didn't want to come back.
Yeah.
But with electroshock and whatever, they brought me back.
I would not touch your story, of course. But I'd say something in this order. Some of you are familiar with a story from the Bible, or you wish you weren't. But consider yourself this. Do you know anybody, when you were growing up, or since, named Lazarus? Anybody ever called a kid Lazarus in your lifetime? Guess why? Here's why. Because the story as it's told, it's about what this gentleman just said. The story as it's told goes like this. Here's this poor Lazarus. He's in the tomb, all right. He's as dead as you can get, apparently. And, Jesus goes in there and messes with his day and comes out with him. And he's walking, and probably doesn't look that good, I don't know. Doesn't say too much. And all the people fall down, and it's on to the next episode. So I would credit the real possibility that life would not have been easy for Lazarus from that moment forward. And I think the reason for that would be that will really mess with your ability to be ordinary, to fit in, to be casual. It would make you a stupendous drag at parties to be exposed to this kind of thing. It's kind of like going to war. Who are you going to tell? Who's never been there? And it can set you apart, and you will never have kinship in this world again. I think that's a real possibility. We've probably heard testimony to that effect just here. Well, it's not just death and exposure to death that can, not inevitably, but can do that. There's other kind of high-end things that do, but certainly this would appear to be one of them. About the light and the architecture and stuff, I don't have much to say about it, but I would say that proximity to dying has enormous consequence for your ability to collude with it's all good, just for example. Just to collude with that nonsense. And it sets you adrift in the midst of people such that you're kind of in the middle of almost a nightmare where you're trying to plead with people to glimpse something that you were lucky enough or burdened enough to glimpse, that you were entrusted with. You can't get anybody's attention. That's a nightmare that more than a few people in this room have probably had. You can see something coming, and and people won't even turn around. So I know about that too, myself. I have some feeling about it. I had spinal meningitis when I was 3 years old. I was dying. I was real close to. And the rest, and probably there's a few more of us in here. That's true. And it's kind of messed with you ever since. You just can't, fit in. Maybe you're not supposed to. Maybe people who've nearly died or are kind of angel among us that are trying to bring, or have given up trying to bring the news that this is not it, that we shouldn't lose our way, that we have enormous work to do to keep in front of us this blessing that we're entrusted with called being alive. And, they're not heavily sought out, these folks, as you probably weren't. Just like I'm not really sought out myself on these men. Well, okay, I get it when you've had enough. This is like dying. Tonight, you start to feel like, shit, this could go on forever. And the only solution to it going on forever is that it doesn't. Just like dying. Eventually, it won't go on forever. It'll stop. So let's stop, because we know we can't conclude. This is wide open, and it's huge. And it's proper that there's no final word that somehow absolves us all of, some general remorse or anything. No. Let's be grown-ups about it and realize, man, there's more where this came from. Oh, yes. There surely is. And, I was just with some of these folks in this room for 7 days, doing this film for 7 days. Yes, and they paid for it, yes. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't like a sentence, a community service. You could go to Jenkinson for 7 days or go to jail. It wasn't that. So I'd like to say something to you. I'm going to take a risk to say. Of course I'm thanking you for coming. I mean, of course I am. And you've got a pretty, I don't mean this movie, I mean me standing here. This is my life, nothing less, nothing more extraordinary or extravagant, but this is it. And you corroborated it in some fashion just by sitting here and just by apparently being willing to wonder about these things without being sure about anything, without cutting off discussion by invoking opinion, because it's a big thing, this. So I'm enormously grateful for it, and I'm going to try to be grateful by pleading with you to consider this. I don't know anything about any of your lives. I don't know anything about where you come from. I'm not saying this as if I do, but I would ask you to consider this. I don't know what brought you here. It's a stunning place to be. You don't need to hear that from me. I've only been here 2 weeks. I have to leave in a couple of days. It's absolutely amazing in every respect. I would ask you to consider, those of you who are, of my vintage, more or less, plus or minus 10 years on either side, that you consider the real possibility that as beautiful as this is, and probably wherever you're from, would have a hard time holding a candle to the kind of quality of daily life that's available to you from being here. It's probably true. But I'd ask you to imagine the real possibility that as you come into, the latter third of your life, that the place you come from needs you more than you need it. And if you would consider the real possibility of dying in the place that granted you your birth, maybe there's some richness that comes or returns to the place that you're from. It can't be achieved. Just listen, you just consider it. I'm not asking you to agree. I'm not asking you to touch a nerve, as you can plainly see. Because the pitch I'm making is not for your sake. That's why. The pitch I'm making to you right now is not because it'll be better for you to do such a thing. But there were a few young people around here this evening, and they're the ones I'm thinking about. And if they don't get to see us die in our place, if they have to leave too to be able to see it, I'm wondering what kind of world we're willing to bequeath to them while we're seeking the comfort that so reasonably could be sought at the ending of our days. That's what I'm saying. I'm not telling you what to do, of course not. But maybe you could think that your death is a gift that you yourself don't suspect the worth of, and that you might entrust it to people that you actually come from. And there'd be some enormity in that that would be beyond your ability to manage it or even intend it. That's all. So that's my way of thanking you for coming and for giving your Saturday night to us this strange consideration that doesn't seem to promise nearly as much as it asks. But maybe that's what being a grown-up is finally to be willing to realize that you're being asked of more and more. And you get a chance maybe to ask less and less as a peace deal you make with the fact that you're still alive. So I really appreciate you being here this evening, and hopefully there's something in here that could be useful to you someday. Take care of your life as if it's quite something, and I'll try to do the same. Probably never see you again, but still life is good even if we don't. Thank you very much for being here. Of course, now let's drink, obviously. What else is there?
For me, generations ago. No, Russia had nothing to do with I almost wish I could almost die so I could have that
basic.
I don't want to go back to Philadelphia, quite honestly. I have no nothing.